Finally! Gods, you all travel so very, very fast. Yes, yes, I'm Dandelion, world-famous poet, lover, and adventurer. Listen, as much as I would like to peruse your fine vintages and wild maidens, I have to ask, have any of you seen a witcher with white hair? Perhaps a stubby dwarf with a mohawk? Yes, the one I refer to is the famed Geralt of Rivia. Yes, his tales are known far and wide, and his ballads I gladly sing. I hoped that he had arrived at Vizima, but it appears by the look of pure astonishment he has yet to arrive. So, as we are waiting on my old dear friend, perhaps pour me a goblet of Estest, and perhaps I can recall a tale or two. All right. You know, for you, fine ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to do something extra special. Today, I will not only recollect all the luxurious tales in chronological order, but also I will rank them. On what scale, you may ask? The Dandelion scale, of course, that being the most accurate scale in regard to literature, ballads, or literally any subject matter. Why? Because it's ranked on the criteria of how much I enjoyed them. Almost spoiler-free, of course. Shall we begin? Here, I have laid out all of the written works of literature, including the collections of short stories and novels. I am not including the graphic novels for this ranking, but perhaps I could touch on their lore in the future. Again, we are ranking them in chronological order, so therefore, we must begin with the infamous Last Wish. This will come to no surprise, but I am going to place it on top. This collection of short stories is a masterclass on diving into the universe of The Witcher. The diversity and variety of the actions that Geralt undertakes portrays the complex character that everyone has come to love through my ballads. It begins with the infamous The Witcher, which vividly displays the brutal reality of being a witcher, invoking on solving a curse on a princess in which has become a striga. It's followed then by the Grain of Truth. That showcases that not all monsters are truly vile in nature. My personal favorite in the collection has to be in the Lesser Evil, which just showcases that. For a witcher, there lays multiple choices. Sometimes, you have to select one that would seem to be the least evil path to realize it's just as monstrous as others. This story showcases the internal conflict of Geralt deciding between making such a choice and even at the conclusion, having to live with his decision. Other stories, such as In Question of Price, introduces the reader to the Child of Surprise, and In the Edge of the World, teaches the history of elven culture and explains why some elves despise humans. To conclude it all, you have The Last Wish, which is the story in which two lovers' souls were intertwined by fate, a wish, and myself. Connecting all the stories is a linear plotline that has Geralt being healed at the Temple of Melitella is genius. Mother Nennek wanted to have him examined more than just physical, but I won't spoil that. The wonderful penmanship that all these stories were melded together with is masterful. Easy S tier. Next is followed by the release of the second collection of short stories entitled The Sword of Destiny. Personally, I find it incredibly troublesome to place these two collections between each other because the stories contained within both are so wildly world and character building. So, this collection is obviously S tier though. Where do we place it ultimately between the two? I still feel that The Last Wish has the edge, though I could see these as interchangeable for most readers like yourself. Unlike the first collection of short stories, the collection does not have a common thread to keep woven into the fabric of the plot. Yet, The plot does revolve around multiple of our favorite characters, including me, of course. In this collection, you begin to see how destiny has been implemented into Geralt's life, especially invoking the law of surprise from previous stories, having Ciri appear in multiple stories. The stories also include the turmoil of Geralt and Yennefer's vacillating relationship, the introduction of dragons, and continuous tales that show Geralt more than a brute who slashes anything down with his silver sword. Seeing the inner clashes with his feelings, thoughts, and interactions with other protagonists causes the reader to fully appreciate the White Wolf. I find that The Last Wish does a better job of creating the universe, so that's why I view it above The Sword of Destiny. Onto the first novel in The Witcher, and oh my, it's a doozy. I will have several controversial opinions on these pieces of art, and The Blood of Elves will be no different. I have always heard that there is a large dislike for the book, and even some credit it as their least favorite novel in the series. I blame this mostly in part to the transition of the format from a short story to prose. I find myself, as an enjoyer of all types of literature, to enjoy the storytelling of this book. We are introduced to the grounds of the iconic Kaer Morhen, Triss Merigold, Lambert, Vesemir, Eskel, and one of the best antagonists, Vilga Forts. It follows our friends attempting to train, teach, and protect Ciri as the entire continent attempts to search for the infamous princess of Cintra. You have me bravely facing a trained assassin alone and ultimately setting up the plot for the entire set of the novels. I will agree that compared to the short stories and some of the novels, it does seem the plot moves at the pace of a boar on a hot summer's day. One of the reasons for this probably has to do with the fact that it is following two collections of short stories. Personally, I would place this in the B tier. Next is The Time of Contempt, and honestly, I love this book. It is going into the A tier, no doubt in my mind. The tutelage that Yennefer and Ciri go through together is adorable in its own way. You get to see the other side of the stern, naturally unemotional sorceress to becoming a motherly figure to Ciri. Meanwhile, you have Geralt on his own path alongside myself, trying to discover who is trying to track the Princess of Cintra and why they employed Rience, the assassin, after me. Ultimately, the conclusion of this book is mind-numbing and is just one of those endings that leaves you awaiting more. No complaints here. I know this opinion is going to give me some slack, but it's not like I'm not known for having a controversial idea or two. Baptism of Fire is my favorite novel in the series, and I place it upon the S tier. Now, please, calm down. Put the pitchforks down and hear me out. First of all, it picks up with the aftermath of the conclusion of the last novel, in which has separated Geralt, Ciri, Yennefer, and even me. The book follows three plots within it: Geralt and a gang of old smiling faces, and some new ones as they try to discover the whereabouts of the lovable Ciri. Then, you have Ciri on the entire other end of the continent, who essentially is having her rebellious teenager years. On the first initial reading, I was frustrated by the attitude and decisions that she was making. This, though, really started the development of who she ends up becoming. Lastly, you have the back-ended politics that leads to the formation of the infamous Lodge of Sorceresses. Redemption, bloodfare, battles, friendships. Plus, this book ties into one of my favorite underrated games of all time, Thronebreaker. Throw me into the deepest dungeon if you must, but this is my list. Speaking of my placement of the next book may just lead me to be burnt upon a stake. The Tower of the Swallow suffers because of my enjoyment of the baptism of fire was so high that it was bound to digress some, but even I was surprised myself. I found myself loving where the fourth novel began, but that's where my excitement went to perish. If you are looking for the equal entertainment of Geralt and I, you are looking at the wrong novel. This novel is essentially series plot driven, which in all is not a bad thing. If we are being honest, majority of the literature of the series revolves around her life. I could see those who hated the baptism of fire style would absolutely adore this novel. That's the great thing about literature. A million eyes can read upon the lines, and those eyes could have trillions of opinions about them. It just so happens, my opinion is this novel is quite average and will be placed into the C tier. Then, you have the epic conclusion that the novels have been leading toward for 5 books converge in The Lady of the Lake. The complete opposite of the previous novel, the pages are action-packed upon the same location. You find yourself in utter excitement as the clash begins to ravish. Your emotions begin to crumble into brittle pieces as we say goodbye to some. And ultimately, in the truest fashion of The Witcher, you are placed right back upon a wild chariot ride, piloted by a drunk dwarf. This book is A tier, no doubt about it. Here we go. Might make a few people upset here too. Now, this is the latest book to come out, and it's the Season of Storms. Listen, I would highly recommend the entire series, and when looked into the grand scope of the entire plotline, I loved it. This book struggles with an identity crisis in my mind. The book is built upon a collection of short stories revolving around Geralt and I, and his pursuit for his swords. The short stories were attempted to meld into a novel, and honestly, just missed the mark for me. This was the only book, personally for myself, that I wanted to completely give up on when I was closing in on the ending. Even as a prequel to the novels, it creates great issues with attempting to follow a common plot line, like The Last Wish exceptionally has done beforehand. This book is a D tier book, and just like that, we are finished. Gods, leave me alone. Okay, I'm coming.
Well, look who it is.